Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the first meeting of the Independent Census Scientific Advisory Committee, I-CSAC. Welcome to the I-CSAC members. I am so impressed with the work you have put into preparing for this meeting. Welcome to those of you who are watching the meeting on YouTube. We're glad you are joining us. And before we get going, I want to make a shout out to members of the Census Quality Reinforcement Task Force, Allison Plyer, Kara Blumfield, and Taylor Sayville. These folks have collaborated in standing up the I-CSAC and are supporting us today. A huge thank you. So turning to the matters at hand, I want to say a few words about who we are and what we are about. What is I-CSAC? As we all know, the Census Bureau is the nation's premier statistical agency. The mission of the Independent Census Scientific Advisory Committee, I-CSAC, our mission, is to provide scientific and technical expertise to address the Bureau's objectives and programs. The ultimate goal is to ensure the accuracy, integrity, and usability of census data. What the I-CSAC does, what we do, is provide scientific expertise, independent review, and constructive feedback. I-CSAC carries forward the vital work of the Census Scientific Advisory Committee, the original CSAC, which was terminated earlier this year. This continuity ensures that the deep institutional knowledge, scientific expertise, and experience of formally vetted CSAC members remain available to the public, stakeholders, and policymakers. I agreed to serve on the Census Scientific Advisory Committee and to chair it because the census is at the foundation of our democracy and what we know about our society. I was happy to be part of providing independent, outside expert advice on the census to the Census Bureau to use my scientific expertise for the greater good. I'm still happy to serve in this way, and I'm gratified that so many of my colleagues on the original CSAC wish to continue as well and are here today. To get us started, I have invited Dr. Holden Thorpe to provide a few remarks that set the stage for us. Dr. Thorpe is editor-in-chief of Science magazines. He is the perfect person to talk to us about the importance of science, data, and external review to enhance the quality of both. Dr. Thorpe.
Thank you, Barbara, and thanks to everyone who's participating today. It is inspirational to see you all assembled and carrying on this work. Clearly, we're in extraordinary times that we hadn't imagined before this in terms of the changes that have been made to the way science is done and the way that the federal government interacts with the scientific enterprise. And across the scientific community, as I travel around the country, I see lots of different reactions to what's going on. But mostly what I see, and this is why I try not to stay in Washington very long, because when I go to campuses around America and I see people continuing on with the work that they are called to do, whether it be in the laboratory or with scholarship or with computation or in the clinic, all across America, science is continuing. And it's continuing in the same traditions of rigor and careful data and rigorous scholarship, and preparing the next generation of scientists in the ways that those of us who are part of it have always been called to do. And so I would encourage anybody who needs some to be uplifted to go somewhere or to your own campus and see somebody doing something that you didn't know they were doing, to continue to drive us forward to a future that is prosperous and benefits from science expertise in every respect. And there are two really important things we need to do that, which are the things that I work on almost every day as the editor-in-chief of Science and the Science family of journals. The first is having high quality data to make scientific judgments from. As stewards of the scientific record, the most important thing that we have to do is to make sure that the data that we have in the records that we produce are reliable, so that people in the present and people in the future can come back and make judgments and conclusions based on high quality data that has been subjected not only to excellent collection, but also to uh, peer review and the expertise of people who are involved in getting it. So this committee is committed to that and to making sure that the census data, which are some of the most important that we have in social science and medicine, continue to be collected at the highest possible standards. Then the second thing we need, of course, is something that we all come to rely on, and that is the review of experts who are disinterested in the outcome of our experiments. And this is something that I have a solemn duty to carry out as the editor of Science, as do my colleagues around scientific publishing, but also in studies that have been produced by various agencies like the National Academies and my own organization, the AAAS, and bodies like this, where all conclusions and statements are subjected to peer review. And this is a committee that is upholding that. And finally, there are a lot of people out there asking, what can I do? What can I do? And that answer is going to be different for everybody. For some people, just keeping their head down and doing the great work that they're doing is the right thing. For other people, being involved in efforts to directly restore things that have been lost from the scientific enterprise are important. And for others, doing what you're doing, which is to figure out a way to keep doing many of the functions that we had been doing before, rather than just reacting to all the changes. And I commend you for that. We had a piece in Science by Gretchen Goldman and Erica Chenoweth, which was titled Scientists' Role in Defending Democracy, which suggested that one constructive thing everybody could do was to do precisely what you're all doing here today. And that is, despite the changes, continuing to collect and preserve the data, expertise, and information that had formerly been stewarded by the federal government, in the hopes that maybe one day it will be stewarded by the federal government again. But even if it isn't, it will be there for the scientists of the present and future to continue to do their work. So I thank and congratulate all of you who are here today for being willing to do this on behalf of the scientific community and the nation. And as always, my most heartfelt appreciation to my friend Barbara Entwistle, who always does everything excellently. So congratulations to you all on picking her for your leader. Barbara, back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Thorpe. I'm inspired by your remarks, and I feel renewed in our mission. I really appreciate you taking the time to address us today. I know how busy you are, and it's great to see you. Thank you. Okay, turning now to the plan for today's meeting. Today we'll cover 3 topics, as you can see on our agenda, which is posted here and also is online on our website, censusscientific.org. There are 3 topics that we will be addressing. The first is the 2030 Disclosure Avoidance System Research Program. The second is determining the privacy loss budget for the IRS use case. And the third is the environmental impacts frame. All 3 of these are strategic topics that relate to how the Bureau maintains Title 13 protections when information is shared with other federal agencies and with the public. All 3 were originally scheduled for discussion at the canceled spring 2025 I-CSAC meeting. We'll start by discussing the plans for the 2030 Census Disclosure Avoidance System. Lance Waller and Clara Bowen will serve as discussants for this topic. A lot was learned from the Bureau's experience with the 2020 census. We'll provide recommendations based on the most updated information from the Census Bureau that was presented via webinar in June of this year. Then we'll cover material shared in anticipation of the March I-CSAC meeting, which was canceled. With John Chaika serving as discussant, we'll discuss and provide recommendations on determining privacy loss budget for the IRS use case. I regard this as a prototype for how the Bureau might share data with other federal agencies while maintaining Title 13 protections. Then we'll examine the environmental impacts frame, an emerging new gridded frame with broad applicability to program, policy, and business analyses and planning at the local, regional, and national levels. Deborah Balk will serve as discussant for this topic. While the Census Bureau will not be presenting, their materials are available for viewing on our website, which is censusscientific.org. Discussant presentations are also available there. Well, a fair question is whether our scientific advice will still find an ear at the Census Bureau. I'm asked this question a lot, and the answer is, I don't know. However, what is a certainty is that our recommendations will have no effect at all if we do not provide them. That's for sure. I had a conversation about this with Allison Plyer, who chaired I-CSAC 2 chairs before me. Neither of us thought the Census Bureau ever accepted recommendations just because they came from an official advisory group. We thought it much more likely that the Bureau accepted recommendations when the collective expertise of the committee resulted in practical, strategic intervention or validation of census plans. That's how things are supposed to work in science and in an open society. That is our hope for today. And it's what we've signed up for in continuing the work of the I-CSAC, because the Census Bureau continues to need independent scientific advice. Thank you, I-CSAC members, for agreeing to continue your service. Now, in many ways, today's meeting will follow the approach traditionally used for I-CSAC meetings. We'll have presentations, discussions, an opportunity for public comment, and recommendations. But there are some important differences. First, the meeting is much shorter. We'll cover 3 topics in 3 hours rather than 6 or 7 topics in a day and a half. You might be wondering, how did we achieve this efficiency? Well, it's because most of the work was done prior to the meeting rather than occurring during the meeting. So that's how we achieved that. But second, and more importantly, there's no involvement of Bureau staff, directly or indirectly. That's what the I in I-CSAC means. We are independent. I-CSAC discussants will give a nutshell presentation of the issue at hand based on publicly available materials, followed by comments and proposed recommendations. So here's how today's meeting will go. We'll cover one topic at a time, just starting with the discussant's presentation, which will go about 20 minutes, and ending with a vote on final recommendations for that topic. Each topic has 40 minutes total allocated for discussion and finalization of recommendations. At 3:05 sharp, we'll pause for public comments submitted on the website. Those of you on I-CSAC know that the public comments always came in exactly at a moment, and that will be true here as well. We'll begin discussion of our second agenda item at 3:15. We'll have a break at 3:55 for 10 minutes. Then we'll reconvene at 4:05. My aim and my hope is to adjourn at 5 o'clock. So I'll start by asking committee members who are present to very quickly introduce themselves. And I will say there are some members who contributed to the preparation of what you're about to see, but had to miss the meeting because of schedule conflicts. When I call on you, please provide your name, your institution, and your area of expertise. In the interest of time, we'll need to make these introductions really succinct. So I'll demonstrate. I am Barbara Entwistle from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I am a social demographer who specializes in migration, population environment interrelations, and research methods. Okay, so then I'm going to call on you as I see you in my gallery. Rogelio, unmute yourself.
Yes. Good afternoon. I'm Rogelio Sainz. I'm from a sociologist and demographer from the University of Texas at San Antonio, and my work is on demography, race and ethnicity, inequality, and the Latino population. Thank you.
Thank you. Lance Waller.
Hello, my name is Lance Waller. I'm a professor in the Department of Biostatistics and Bioinformatics in the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University. My expertise is in spatial analysis, geographic information systems, and small area estimation.
Thank you. Kristen.
I'm Kristen Moore. I'm a social psychologist at Child Trends, and I do research and evaluation studies on children and youth.
Thank you. Claire.
I'm Claire Bowen. I'm a senior fellow and I lead our data governance and privacy practice area at the Urban Institute. And I specialize in thinking about these data governance aspects and privacy protections.
Thank you. Bonnie.
I'm Bonnie Swinor. I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins University and the director of the Disability Health Research Center there. My expertise is in measurement of disability data and collecting data on people with disabilities and using that information to address the inequities that disabled people face.
Thank you. Andrew. You're muted.
My name is Andrew Houghtonville. I'm a professor of economics at the University of New Hampshire. I'm also the director of the University of New Hampshire Institute on Disability. I also have a specialization in identifying the population with disabilities using surveys and administrative data, and also the measurement of employment outcomes and program participation more broadly.
Thank you. Ron.
Hi, I'm Ron Prevost. I'm a senior demographer at Demographic Analytics Advisors. As an applied demographer, my specialty areas are in small area estimates and projections, administrative records, and the impact of statistics on federal and state funds.
Thank you. John.
I'm John Chaika. I retired a few years ago from Mathematica as a senior fellow, but continue to consult. And my expertise is in administrative records and survey methods.
Thank you. Deborah.
Hi, I'm Deborah Balk. I'm the director of the CUNY Institute for Demographic Research and a professor at the Marx School of Public and International Affairs at Booth College at the City University of New York. I'm a spatial demographer with an expertise in a wide variety of topics at the intersection of population and environment.
Thank you. Alex.
Aloha, I'm Alex Ortega. I'm Dean of the Thompson School of Social Work and Public Health at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I'm an epidemiologist, a healthcare policy researcher, and my work is focused on immigrant health and public health disaster research.
Thank you. Rachel.
Hi, everyone. I am Rachel Cummings, and I am faculty at Columbia University in the Department of Industrial Engineering and Operations Research. My expertise area is on differential privacy and on like a disclosure avoidance more broadly.
Great. Thank you. Christine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christine Ajrush. I'm research professor at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan, where I co-direct an Alzheimer's disease resource center for minority aging research. My areas of expertise are aging, social relations, and health disparities. And I have done a lot of work in the past on identifying Middle Eastern and North African populations from the white category using the ancestry question in the U.S. Census.
Thank you. Salima.
Oops.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Salima LaForce. I'm a senior research scientist at the Georgia Institute of Technology. My center is the Center for Advanced Communications Policy. My expertise is in disability studies, specifically looking at communications access, employment outcomes, and health outcomes as they relate to health literacy.
Thank you. Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Curran. I'm a professor at the University of Washington. I am the director of the Center for Studies in Demography and Ecology at the University of Washington. And I am an expert in migration research as well as population dynamics and environmental dynamics. Thank you.
Thank you. And Gwen.
Hi there, I'm Gwen Evans Lomayesva. I'm a PhD candidate in demography, obtaining a joint degree in sociology at the Population Studies Center at the University of Pennsylvania. And my area of expertise is all things the demography of the American Indian Alaska Native and tribal nations.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that was everyone. I don't think I missed anyone. Okay. Well, excellent. We are a little bit ahead of time, and that's a really good thing. So at this point, I'm going to be turning it over, but here's how it's going to go. It'll be 20 minutes of presentation, then comments and questions that you might have. And then I will share the recommendations on the shared Google Doc and go over them so that we'll have a vote by the end of our time together on this topic. Any questions before we start? Okay, great. I'm going to turn it over to Lance Waller now to talk to us about the disclosure avoidance system plans.
Thank you, Barbara. As you mentioned in your introduction, a lot of the information we're basing this on is a webinar provided by the disclosure avoidance team at the U.S. Census Bureau in June, in addition to manuscript I'll cite on the next slide, white paper led by Michael Hawes, part of the disclosure avoidance team here, on outlining the priorities. As I think many listening, but maybe not everyone, the 2020 census introduced a new formal differential privacy-based disclosure avoidance system, and the planning is underway for the 2030 census. Also builds on what was learned in taking an important theoretical concept of capping probability of disclosure and implementing it something like the U.S. decennial census. I want to thank Claire Bowen and other members of I-CSAC, Kristen, Salima, Rogelio, and Talithia, who interacted with us in preparing these slides. Can we have the next slide, please? The highlights from the webinar, I mentioned this white paper. I'd encourage anyone interested in how the disclosure avoidance system works to read it. I think Michael Hawes and colleagues did a wonderful job summarizing the complicated components involved in this. This white paper is a set of universal principles, or a set of principles across the Census Bureau in what they're referring to as a triple trade-off of official statistics, illustrated by the colorful figure here from the presentation. There's a trade-off between specific accuracy and confidentiality. If we knew everything about everybody, we'd know who everyone was. There's also a tension between confidentiality and availability. Not everything is available to everyone all at once. And so a disclosure avoidance system is intended to maintain the Title 13 protections of individual responses, yet provide accurate data down to the small area level for census data users. So running official statistics is generating statistics for all kinds of uses, and you can imagine that this this tension between these different competing goals is important for both stakeholder engagement and scientific integrity, as Sally Keller likes to point out. We want data that can be useful, but we also want data that follows the confidentiality restrictions. So the disclosure avoidance system, or DAS, puts a formal framework to this. Now there's several options to this. If we go to the next slide, please. Again, these figures are from the webinar and also illustrated in the manuscript. So this overall goal is to obtain these 7 core principles outlined in Michael Hawes et al. Paper. One is supporting assessment of disclosure risk. So not only providing some level of a cap on confidentiality, but being able to assess what the exact risk of disclosure is. Supporting the assessment of the impact and availability on the accuracy of statistics you may calculate from these data, to target the protection for socially vulnerable populations or certain age groups, target the data accuracy, so we know we're getting high quality data for the different subsets we're using it for. Track cumulative disclosure risk over time. Now, this is quite a challenge, and we'll see this in the graph below. The more you use the data, the more you connect it to other data, the more difficult it is to maintain the guarantees of protection. Then the last two are be transparent, describe how you did this so we all understand all the data users have access to clear descriptions of the decisions made, and seventh, being feasible. One way to maintain confidentiality is to have it be impossible to release the data. So there's this tension between availability, accuracy, and feasibility for creation. So as you imagine, something of the scale of the census is, this is a difficult task, and there's a large team working on it. So the overall goal is to uphold all 7 of these principles, although there'll be tensions between the principles, just like there's tensions between those primary goals. In the webinar, there's a presentation. I encourage interested people to take a look at both the webinar and the white paper, where they considered 10 candidate models for protecting individual confidentiality, and how well they performed against each of these 7 principles. A darker color means it did better. Lighter color means it did worse. And I know the print is small, but cell suppression says you would not necessarily release things down to the finest grid where you have the risk of only having one person in one neighborhood in a certain age group, for instance. It's transparent and feasible, easier to do, but it doesn't target accuracy, and it does poorly on the first 5. The other options considered, I won't go through all of them, but I will point out there was a 2010 swapping algorithm that was used, and you can see it did well on principles 2, 4, and 6, but poorly on target protections. And then the synthetic data and the formal privacy controlling noise are the bottom 2 rows, which are darker across the board and more in line with the census strategy evolving out of 2020 and in the planning stages for 2030. So there were 5 areas of focusing the goals in the research agenda through the 2030 disclosure avoidance system. I think this table is helpful. They're not quantitative in the sense that we can say it's twice as protective or half as protective or 2.5 times as protective, but it does give you a qualitative sense of which things work better than others. And the order going down the table, you tend to have darker colors representing better performance across the board, but they're not identical, and you will see not everything does well on every category. So if I could have the next slide, please. This is another slide from the presentation. These are some of the decisions yet to come. So we are in 2025. The planning for the 2030 is well underway, but not all decisions have been finalized or made. And this is a list just to give the committee and those attending a sense of what is still under consideration. The total population counts, invariants or quasi-invariants in between. So trying to decide what is not changed or where disclosure avoidance noise is not added, if anywhere, between the state level down through the county, the tract, block group, and the block levels. Other invariants to be included to make sure there are no negative counts or so on, or which counts are true counts to calibrate the disclosure avoidance. Accuracy targets for total population counts at the block level, in addition to moving up from the block to the block group to the tract to the county to the state, and which formally private algorithm to be used for the noise injection, which puts the differentially private defined cap. And then the range and possible combination of disclosure avoidance and statistical post-processing solutions to consider. There were 10 strategies on the table, there are combinations of these. So all of these are being worked on and not finalized, but you can see the sort of strategy that's coming into play. Next slide, please. And this is the timeline. Again, this is from their presentation. You can see we're at the transition from the 2025 framework and research planning into the research feedback and development component. And then coming up in 2027, the final system will be selected and then implemented preparation and production from 2 years prior to 2030 into the years following 2030. And each of the steps listed here. I think this is helpful for thinking about the choices that need to be made at this stage for the 2030 census and what the plans are as things fold out. So there's still a lot of decisions to be made, details to put in place, options to consider, and those frame our recommendations. So the next slide, please. Now, Barbara, I didn't know if you wanted to read through these after discussion, or do you want me? We have 5 recommendations, so our list is short.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Lance?
Okay, thank you. So next slide, please. Because of the development and documentation is so important, I-CSAC recommends developing and maintaining an ongoing communication plan to include regular updates, perhaps at certain times in that decision-making process, regarding the deadlines, decisions, and deliverables, along with what milestones will be implemented as we move through that timeline. We think planning ahead to provide updates, even if these are short lists of things in progress, would be incredibly helpful for the user community and inside the Bureau for across the team in preparation. Second, I-CSAC recommends developing and releasing versions of the implementation detail, likely in a series of technical reports, on a regular timeline to allow feedback and refinement in advance of the final release. So this provides some interaction with the data user community. The 2020 disclosure avoidance system rollout was the interaction with the user community was rough. I think everyone would consider that. And some of the demonstration products released as examples from the 2010 census, using that with and without the new disclosure avoidance system, have proved useful, and the research community becoming familiar with the sorts of adjustments that they might expect. And releasing official citable versions of data sets with versions allows for reproducibility. It also allows the Bureau to make updates that are tracked, and we would know if an individual uses it, or if a research team uses a data set, we would know which one, and we could address concerns straight away. Next slide, please. Third, I-CSAC recommends the development and release of this timeline of the planned action. So we saw the timeline of the general components, and it would be nice to have an update and a place people could check on what actions are in place, on who's delivering what by whom, and certainly plans adjust, but having a way to check in the progress, especially as we move from the midpoint 2025 toward the implementation in 2030. I-CSAC also recommends publishing the technical details on how the evaluation of the different framework methods. That table with the better and worse performance was really helpful for individuals researching and data users working in the space. It would be helpful to see how much better, how much worse these went, and different versions of this could be available, just sort of adding a little more technical detail to that table, so we can see under what circumstances, say, synthetic data is preferable or helpful, or how combinations might work. And then last, I believe we recommend building and establishing a team of trusted test users from the user community to aid in the development, implementation, and communication of an evaluation plan for the disclosure avoidance. I think planning ahead to build this sort of user community would be helpful to see how to build those versions recommended. I think in recommendation 2 might evolve and grow as the Bureau moves towards the implementation and collection of the 2030 decennial census data. I believe that is our final recommendation. I want to thank again the subcommittee working on this, and I'm happy to hear comments, questions, offer clarification. So thanks for your attention and your time.
Yeah, thank you, Lance. And I want to open the floor to questions that people may have. We'll dig into the recommendations in a moment, but why don't we, if people have questions about the overall first part of that presentation and what the plan is, this would be a good time to ask. If you would just raise your hand, either using the little hand raise thing or just raise your hand because I can see you all. So who has a question?
Thanks for the team for making it crystal clear. Yeah, we do appreciate it. We know there's a breadth of experience in this committee, so please feel free to ask any sort of questions or clarify anything I may have brushed over a little too quickly. This is a large operation, and we've learned a lot from the 2020 experience and trying to move that into just a standard operating procedure going forward of having feedback interaction with the data use community during the development period, and then documentation where people can dig into the details as they would like.
So I guess I have a question, sort of remembering, there were a lot of lessons learned in 2020, and you alluded to that as well. And I guess what I'm wondering, whether, sort of what is in place to make sure that different data sets can be linked, for example. I'm remembering households and individuals. And that if properly planned with the right kinds of user inputs and so forth and so on, all of that should be smooth. But I wonder if you had any more specific comments about that.
No, thanks. That's a really important consideration. I think um, the table and the paper are really helpful summaries of the myriad decisions that go into one goal of protecting disclosure risk and capping that. I think one of the things we've learned is that there's a lot of small decisions involved in implementing that, and trying to come up with a plan for communicating those decisions as they're made. I think is particularly helpful for people understanding what is considered invariant or where the linkages can occur. We were encouraged by some of the levels that mentioned specific geography levels at which they were planning for, where invariants or decisions were planned to be made. And we'd like to keep that kind of level of communication in the development. Ron, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you. As I was looking at the presentation and you were talking about availability, there's a difference between availability and utility. And so I was wondering, was there any discussion about how they would work with users, whether they be folks like us or federal, state, and local governments, to determine the specificity of detail that they require and the impact of minimizing some of these tabulations versus the accuracy consideration about what is absolutely necessary to maintain the utility for a variety of purposes?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. That the element of feasibility, I think there's feasibility in terms of creating the data products for use, and then there's feasibility on the utility on the side. So I think the discussion what you're raising there are several key regular uses of the census data products by state and local governments and so on. And that data use community, we feel like shouldn't just be a handful of individuals, but it should represent some of these major uses for evaluation, for resource allocation, in order to make sure that the protection of individual disclosure does not impede or redirect decisions to be made. As the groups and those interested listening are all aware, this is a really multifaceted component. So as we were discussing it, the goal of developing a communication plan and a collection of individuals outside who are users who can provide some feedback in time for adjustments should a decision have unintended consequences or for particular uses. I think that we didn't frame it in terms of utility, but that was in mind. So I do think that the discussion of the makeup of that user community would be something we may want to specify to make sure that those uses are not overly impacted. So thanks for that. Sarah?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to the committee, and thank you to the work of the Census community behind the efforts here. I had a question which is somewhat related to the ones that Barbara and Ron have asked around utility, and particularly making clear what it is that's happened, what has been done to the data. And as you move from various levels of resolution, higher resolution detail, to what extent, so that the public understands as well as the users understand the possibilities of uncertainty associated with a particular set of estimates, perhaps, and how you see the need for the census, or to what extent you've seen that translation work happening to help ensure confidence in the estimates and understanding of the nature of that complexity that you were just discussing.
Yeah, thanks. I think this utility point, it would be helpful for us to clarify more. We were encouraged that some of their discussion talked about different levels of geography. I'm I, I'm interested because it's the area I work in, is with small area estimation. I think some of the disclosure avoidance implementation earlier was focused at broader levels. The math works out at one scale, but may not at others. And injected noise for small numbers may have a greater impact. So I was encouraged that they were recognizing there were invariants to consider at different levels of geography. I think there's a recognition of addressing that. This is just my interpretation, and Claire and others feel free to step in. I do think it's important that that be considered. And again, I think that's where an external user community would be helpful to gain feedback from. I think we all notice the components we work with most. And that's, again, there's a tension of getting everybody's opinion or nobody's opinion. So building on some of these utility cases, I think Ron outlined a few that were helpful, that we may want to be thinking about at the state and local level. But I think documenting this, that's where the sequence of technical reports, I think, would be particularly helpful. So even if someone wasn't aware of the decision made at the time, there would be a way to document and track that back. So I think those would all come to better understanding, but a communication plan should also include communication to the public, and trying to understand the uncertainty associated with this. So thanks. That's really a helpful suggestion. Kristen?
Yeah, this is a really important topic about the census, but the Census Bureau, of course, produces many, many products where there are similar issues. And so this might be just a comment, but I do think reporting and consideration around those other products is also really important.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that is really helpful. And I-CSAC had a presentation from Sally Keller about moving from data sets to data products that I think really influenced some of our thinking in viewing this. And I think it's been a shift in the communication as well of what's being presented and provided to the data use community. So I think the thinking of a data product of something that was released at a time under set of decisions is a different sort of communication than a tabular data set and a README file. I know they do more than that, but and I think they're consciously moving in this direction, and it helps them be a leader in this kind of federal data space. So I think you're right. This isn't just for the decennial census, but can echo across all the data products. So thank you. Andrew? And then John.
Yeah. So I haven't really fully fleshed out my thoughts. I think about the attack on the 2010 data, the simulated reconstruction. And I think that the tools of the adversary have gotten better, right? Including data sets with every person in it, right? They get more and more specificity in what they're using to train, the AI models to reconstruct this kind of thing, to do the data set reconstruction. Is there any, does the Census Bureau, or is there any effort to kind of keep up with the adversary? Because, I can see losing more and more ground, right? And losing more and more specificity in the public facing data and tabulations. And at what point do they become kind of outcome determinant, that they would change a policy recommendation, that they would change a low area, a small area estimate such that it could lead to a different policy conclusion? That's a long string.
Yeah.
But I'll just keep it short. Is there any attempt to kind of understand the adversary's tools and then attenuate the degree, the severity of the perturbations or the disclosure risk, the disclosure activities, the anti-disclosure activities, to ratchet that up over time, such that we could then know the trends? Because I'll stop.
No, it's true. The adversarial component and the fact that no decision is final in terms of finding the same protection over time. That the details on focusing on adversarial component were not part of the presentation or the paper we're talking about. The principles can be involved, but I think that you can look. Confidentiality is kind of a dual use component. As soon as you set one standard, that's the goal for someone to beat.
Yeah, that's right.
I think identifying both the risks and potential consequences of different vulnerabilities should be a component of the ongoing evaluation, an ongoing evaluation of the success of a disclosure avoidance. I think the increasing interconnectability, able to match these things or search them and learn from them, makes this an incredibly difficult situation. So I think that's another area of related research, is how robust would protections be. But I think also leveraging estimation of risk with potential consequences is important, and some of these use cases of identifying what is the impact of what types of disclosure, and there could very well be serious impacts of aggregate levels of exposure. So I think it's an important component that needs to be in here. But I believe we might have just enough time for John's comment.
Yeah, good. John, if you could make it short, and then we'll move to recommendations.
Okay. In 2020, different forms of disclosure protection were applied to different major data products. And one consequence of that is inconsistency across the different products. And I just wondered if that was anything that the Census Bureau considered all in developing this initial plan.
I believe it was a motivator for having more of a plan, or having a plan for the whole build-up and development. I do think it's something that's important for them to consider. To make, yeah, the 7 principles are supposed to apply, but each one of those principles involves a set of decisions as well. So as those come into place, and then the various data products that come out on different timelines, and what disclosure avoidance means for, say, the American Community Survey or other releases, I think is something that it'd be helpful as that becomes more of a cohesive set of practices. We're hoping the communication plan recommendation keeps the conversation up front and ongoing, not only within those of the Bureau working on different parts, but also with the data users on the outside, so that we all recognize. I think Andrew's point's a really good one. This is a dynamic process. You are trying to maintain disclosure in a shifting landscape. So we do think communication's key, and also feedback inside and outside by a user community. And to track that and to track differences, that's some sort of citable component of knowing what version of you're using, and what version of the disclosure avoidance is going along with that. So I want to thank everyone for their comments, and Barbara, back to you. I believe you are muted.
Yes, I am. So thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share the Google Docs screen. You all have access to this. And I already put in the chat that I had made a small change. So I want to focus on the recommendations. I mean, there's some introductory material here, which everyone should read at their leisure. And if there's an issue, let me know. But the recommendations, this group has 5 focused recommendations. I made a slight change to the first one that I called out in the chat. And I bolded it, not because it's going to stay bold, but just so that everyone could see what it was. And especially Lance and Claire and others on that team could make sure that they were comfortable with that and that it captures the feeling. I wonder if people have other changes or questions or suggestions about these recommendations. Shall I read them? Why don't I read them? That's part of our thing that we do, right? I-CSAC recommends developing and maintaining an ongoing communication plan, which we've just been discussing quite a lot, to a variety of audiences, including the public. That's what I added. That includes regular updates regarding deadlines, decisions, and deliverables, along with other milestones related to the development, implementation, and interpretation of the 2030 census data to engage and inform the user community. Any issues with that? I can't see all of you anymore, so you'll have to tell me. Lance and Claire, are you okay with my edit?
Yep, friendly amendment accepted.
Okay, fantastic.
I think it's a good addition.
Any other thing with this one? Oh, Ron. Oh, good.
Yeah, I did want to embed utility in here somewhere. I think we have to be very specific and talk about perhaps in this discussion it could be in recommendation 1 or perhaps in recommendation 5 about the trade-off between utility and risk. And I think perhaps it could be in both because in in the first recommendation we talk about bringing a variety of audiences together, determining what utility perspective would be determining what is absolutely necessary versus what is nice, and then how does that apply to risk, which is perhaps, I guess you could look at it as a combination of quote unquote cell suppression and some other methodology that's employed. And then finally, I think that relates to number 5, where we talked about a team to test out the consequences of what has been accomplished. Thank you.
Ron, I agree with that. I think we need to be, we'll have to phrase it in a certain way because technically the 7 principles that were outlined by census include those aspects of it. And so if we want to specifically call out those particular parts of the 7 principles, then I think we should but saying that, framing it such that acknowledging the fact that census is thinking about that, it's just not, it's interesting framework because I think you're highlighting like we are all used to hearing about disclosure risk and utility, but now it's shifting into this whole like, well, this is also the trade-off of accessibility and feasibility, and then now these 7 principles that also has like that trust component, which people were talking about before too. So that is all to say, like, I agree with you, but I think we need to be careful on how we frame it, just given the fact that it's supposed to be in the already clumped into that framework, but calling out specifically saying that's like what we're familiar with, I think it's important.
Claire, do you
Yeah.
have a suggestion about how to incorporate Ron's thought into these recommendations? I was thinking it would go in 4, perhaps, maybe 5.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe 5. I will start writing something. Give me a moment.
Okay, I'll call on Christine, who has her hand raised.
Yeah, sorry. I just have a very minor comment. The change in the number 1 recommendation, it's just that when you say audiences, including the public, that includes regular updates, I would just suggest we have a different word, like including the public that involves regular updates regarding deadlines, just because it gets For me, it's confusing when there's too many of the same word in the same sentence.
Perfect.
Very,
Done.
very minor. Thank you.
All suggestions are welcome. Okay, so Claire's working on the last one in response to Ron's comment. So I'll read the second one. I-CSAC recommends developing and releasing versions of the 2030 Census DAS implementation details in a series of technical reports published on a regular timeline to allow feedback and refinement in advance of final release. Any comments about that one? Okay. Number 3, I-CSAC recommends the development and release of a timeline outlining planned actions associated with the 2030 Census DAS, including what will be delivered by whom and when. Comments about that? Great. I-CSAC recommends the Bureau publish the technical details, yes, on how the evaluation of the 10 proposed DAS framework methods was conducted to meet each of the 7 principles. Comments on that? Salima.
My actually didn't get to unmute quickly enough, but my comment is on number 3. Just to stay in alignment with what we are recommending in recommendation 1, to include that will be delivered by whom, to whom, and when.
Got it. I'll add that. That sounds like a friendly amendment. Okay. Anything on 4, and then we'll get to 5, where Claire has made a suggestion here in response to Ron's comment. I-CSAC recommends building and establishing a team of trusted test users from the user community to aid in the development, implementation, and communication of an evaluation plan for the 2030 Census DAS, especially in the context of the privacy utility trade-off and availability. Ron? Oh, Gwen? Okay.
Hi, quick question. So if a vision like for this includes something like the DAS test products that were released in 2020, we might want to identify or say something about data test products or iterations of the DAS. So it's clear that we're talking about testing those different iterations.
Yeah, Lance and I talked about this when we made that list on slide 9 of the presentation, because we were kind of hesitant to say explicitly that they should do these ones because it could be like other kind of products that they might find that would be more useful. But to your point, Gwen, maybe what we could do is put that into like the intro text instead. And that way, like, because like we're really hesitant about like we should do this. Or I say we, as in the royal we, because I'm not. Is that right, Lance? Do you think that might be Gwen and Lance? What are your thoughts on that and the rest of the committee?
I think it's a good idea to add it to the intro text.
Yeah, I think so. I think those were very useful for those who used them. So I do think it's a really good contribution to that kind of building that user community. I think the experience from that is one of the things that motivated the idea of having products that people could point to. But since the demonstration products have different choices made in them, to John's point, that's why it's important to have version numbers or specific ways to cite. If you use this data product, here's how to cite it. And that way, the rigor and reproducibility and the level of comparison goes up. But that's something we can put in that preamble. But thanks, Gwen. That's a really important point.
Great. So, Ron, how are you feeling about the change to recommendation 5? Does it capture what you had in mind?
I mean, the point that I was trying to get across is there's this triumvirate of privacy, utility, and accuracy, and that it addresses all 7 principles, but it's like, can users accept different levels of specificity at different levels of geography? So that, perhaps you get one set of tabulations at the national level, and then as you get down to lower levels, you can be assured of a higher accuracy, but you're willing to give up, say the age group was, single year of age, but at the block level, I'm willing to take 0 to 4 kind of thing. Where at a higher level of geography, I would want to have the full detail. So I don't know where that all fits, but that is a key point for so many users.
I agree with that, Ron. I think the issue that I think this is where we're having a slight tension is that I don't want to be too specific about the uses because we don't know all those kind of trade-offs, what's going to happen in play. And I think making the recommendation to have these trusted group of users or whatever the test team is to help navigate that, because like to your point, like I like to use the example, like New York City definitely needs block level. Where I grew up in Idaho and Wyoming doesn't need block level like certain specificities for certain demographic information, right? It just, but to make those decisions, I think that's when you need to have like this trusted team of users to count it and vet that and to think navigate those different kind of trade-offs at those different geographies and to help inform. But it's kind of tough because like we hope those trusted users are the ones that we can actually trust, right? It's right. So that's up to, I'm not sure if that like how we want to phrase that either, but I'm hearing you. I just don't want to be too prescriptive given we just don't know what are all the possible situations.
Oh,
right?
agreed. I'm not trying to be too prescriptive. I'm trying to introduce the point of view that there can be flexibility in the level of detail dependent on the geography. And then that way, users don't lose a whole set of information, but they would lose some specificity at the block level, perhaps. I'm just using that as an example, in order to get greater accuracy while maintaining privacy.
So, Ron, would it work to add something to 4 that just say methods was conducted to meet each of the 7 principles at multiple levels of geography? Would that work for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that's a helpful addition because I think we're addressing it in a couple of these, and the addition to number 5, I think helps the idea that we can't catalog all possible usage, but the test users will be able to cover a broader scope of that. Bonnie had a note that does trusted test users, does it need to be defined? I think we don't want to be too prescriptive on it, but maybe we want to say a community of tested users instead of a team, because team might sound a little like a small number.
Yeah, maybe we can add,
Deborah.
sorry, maybe we can add like a systematically, something about, I mean, the Census Bureau has plenty of opportunities to draw users systematically. It knows a lot of its main use cases, won't know all of them, but the systematic nature of it would at least get to a wide swath of use cases, both at issues of geography, issues of attributes, the kinds of things that we've just been discussing. And so those trade-offs differ. So maybe we want the trusted users, right? From a systematically drawn from a use, something like that, or,
Maybe recruiting and establishing instead of building and establishing. I'm not sure.
Or sampling, recruiting. Yeah. I mean, if there's anybody who can recruit in a manner that's will make the use cases a generalizable in some sense, it would be the Bureau.
Okay.
People are at time. Thanks.
Yeah, Allison is going to be interrupting us in a minute, literally. And so I want to hold the vote after we hear the public comment. But I will ask, for people to vote on approving the 5 recommendations as they stand. So thanks to everyone. I think that was really a good discussion and some good changes to the recommendations to make sure that they convey. And yeah, thanks especially to Claire and to Lance for their leadership of this committee. Okay, I'm going to unshare. Let's see. Great.
Great. Now it is time to read the public comments. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Allison Plyer, co-chair of the Census Quality Reinforcement Task Force. We want to thank members of the public who submitted their comments for the Independent Census Scientific Advisory Committee and the Census Bureau's consideration. All public comments will be posted on I-CSAC's website, which is censusscientific.org, and they will be submitted to the Census Bureau. In one case, comments submitted exceeded the time limit allowed, and I'll read aloud the summary version of those comments provided by the author, but the full version will be uploaded to censusscientific.org and submitted to the Census Bureau. So first, we have a comment from Coalition on Human Needs and Partnership for America's Children. The Coalition on Human Needs and Partnership for America's Children are submitting these comments with gratitude for the opportunity to provide advice to the committee, which we understand will be available to the Census Bureau staff on critical topics affecting the count of young children. Our organizations are two of the founders and members of the steering committee of Count All Kids. We have the following comments on the operational plan for 2030. We appreciate that the Bureau has been working on developing new strategies for improving the count of young children. It is essential to test multiple new strategies since some may not work. Therefore, we thank the Bureau for including the 2026 census test in its operational plan, and we urge the Bureau, if it must reduce the number of locations, to make sure that it can still test all of the new strategies under consideration. We are pleased that it includes as part of the effort to improve the count of young children, considering quote, leveraging birth records and other administrative and supplemental data to augment collected response data, end quote. We agree that administrative records, particularly birth records, would be very valuable, but we also appreciate that this is intended to augment and not replace response data. Wherever possible, response data should be used since it will be the most current. It is also most likely to be accurate with respect to race and ethnicity because it will use the new SPD 15 standards, while birth certificates will in most states not be updated in time to have accurate race and ethnicity for all young children. We thank the Bureau for developing, quote, models that will help inform the contact strategy for households that housing units that potentially have young children, end quote, but note that they must also test which contact strategies work. We are pleased that the Bureau intends to continue its non-ID response program and is cautious about its security. We remind the Bureau that at many addresses, the householder may have left off residents who then file a non-ID response, and that any security assessments of non-ID response must include counting legitimate doubled-up household members, especially since many young children live in such households. We are disturbed that the plan has very limited attention to strategies for reaching people with low literacy skills and seems to focus on language barriers and community outreach. We note that 20% of residents whose first language is English struggle with literacy at a very basic level, and young children are disproportionately missed in households where no adult has graduated from high school. We believe that reaching these households requires the Bureau to, one, review all aspects of the form direction and layout, as well as questions with literacy experts. Two, test where people with low literacy receive information such as radio, TV, and online, music, game, and other sites, and include outreach in English in those venues. Three, provide information in those ads about how people can respond by phone in English. And four, make sure that the English language phone lines are adequately staffed. We thank the Bureau for concluding demographic analysis of the undercount of young children by state and county in its plan. Thank you for the opportunity to submit these comments. If you have any questions about these comments, please contact Deborah Weinstein with her email address and Marquita Little Newman at her email address. The second comment comes from Adeline Wilcox. Congress should review the formats in which name data are collected by various federal agencies. Jerry Mulrow, in her keynote address to the Federal Committee on Statistical Methodology 2024 Research and Policy Conference, called attention to the growth of record linkage. Statistical agencies link records with their parent agencies and across statistical agencies. How did the Census Bureau determine their format for collecting name data? Do they collect first name, middle initial, and last name because those fields are optimal to uniquely identify persons? Or should the Census Bureau collect more complete name data, especially for four-part Hispanic names? The Census Bureau attempted to link records from the 2020 census to IRS tax returns and 1099 forms. The IRS appears to defer to the Social Security Administration regarding legal names. In the SSA's Program Operations Manual system, within a records maintenance chapter, I found a section headed RM 10212.000, legal names and changes to the Numident SSA, defines a person's legal name differently depending on whether they are born in the US or foreign born. In 2018, the Department of Homeland Security collected full name in a single text string. Since then, DHS Office of Homeland Security Statistics has switched to collecting first name and last name for better matching, they say. When questioned at the aforementioned conference, DHS said an immigrant with four names might get their first two names recorded in the first name and their last two names in the last name. Is this ideal, or are the data collected in a format to suit the software? On social media, ICE used 5 names to identify an illegal alien. Ron Daniel Junio de Olveria Lima, and they provide the web address. While the Census Bureau leads us to believe that record linkage proceeds cleanly, this is hardly true. On October 18th, 2019, Edward Ned Porter, U.S. Census Bureau, presented a poster titled False Duplicates in the Census, a novel approach to identifying false matches from record linkage software. In 2017, demographer John Weeks blogged about his similar experience. The Census Bureau developed the CPS name screening tool to validate name response values. Is this tool in use, and how does it affect record linkage? Congress should ask GAO to study the federal government's name data collection and processing. Despite lack of research and testing, what improvements can be made this late in the decade? The next comment comes from Ed Kissam. My comments are about the Census 23 planning survey and focus on understanding and responding effectively to ameliorate the suppression of response from households that have non-citizens living in them. It is very welcome news to see that the Census Bureau is including a number of questions that are definitely relevant to understanding the factors that will affect non-citizen response. I project that about 10 million households, including mixed status households with U.S. citizens in them, may be reluctant to varying degrees to respond to the census due to hunkering down in response to aggressive enforcement. This will be exacerbated by a citizenship question potentially being added to the 2030 census. Census Bureau research by J. David Brown and his colleagues makes it clear that the specific mix of legal statuses in a household gives rise to varying degrees of reluctance to respond and subsequent household omission, and that response is particularly low for Hispanic immigrant households, especially those where some household members are of unknown legal status, unauthorized, or lawfully present in a fragile liminal legal status. Analytically, it will be important to recognize that census response by the head of household for census purposes will affect enumeration of everyone residing at a particular address. The evidence is clear that an important census response problem to overcome is omission of household members in immigrant households who are perceived, rightly or wrongly, as vulnerable to detention and deportation. It should be remembered that the Census 2023 Planning Survey will provide only an initial assessment. The survey findings should be understood as important but not definitive, and ideally, there should be a robust discussion of the limitations of the research. It will be crucial to follow up with qualitative research, including focus groups, but ideally also including community ethnographic case studies, as was done in 1990, to more fully understand the community dynamics of census, as well as the individual and household dynamics of census response. Such research is essential for designing effective census promotion messaging that is designed to be effective with diverse audience segments with low response communities. My hope is that analysis of current Census 2030 planning survey will be completed in time to be incorporated into design of the 2026 census test research. And I'm going to stop that one there as it's exceeded the timeline. I'll do a minute from the Census Quality Reinforcement Task Force. As co-chairs of the Census Quality Reinforcement Task Force, a nonpartisan, multidisciplinary learning community, we want to thank the members of Independent Census Scientific Advisory Committee for their continued voluntary service, lending their expertise to the Census Bureau to ensure that the experts within the Census Bureau continue to receive robust feedback and input that is essential to the scientific process. We are especially grateful that the I-CSAC has prioritized reviewing and supporting the Census Bureau's work on privacy protection. Among federal agencies, Census Bureau data carries the strongest privacy safeguards. By law, the Bureau is prohibited from releasing any information that could identify an individual or business. Any census employee or official who releases individual data faces severe consequences, including fines of up to $250,000 and prison sentences of up to 5 years. Every census employee takes a lifelong oath to protect these data, which is essential to ensuring public trust that responses will only be used for statistical purposes. We will post the full version of all of these comments on censusscientific.org, and I'll turn it back over to you, Barb.
Well, thank you very much, Allison. I appreciate those comments. That was really great. Okay, so just finishing up where we were before we heard the public comments, I just wanted to have a vote, and now we're in gallery mode. It's easy for me to see everybody. So what I want to do is just ask all who are in favor of approving these recommendations, please raise your hand. Okay, what I see is unanimous. Let me put my own up. Okay, terrific. Thank you so much. I appreciate, again, thanks to Lance Waller and to Claire Bowen for leading that subcommittee and all of those who worked on it. And it gives us a great sort of example of how we're going to move forward with our other two topics. So we're about to shift to John Chaika. I want to suggest, John, that for yours, rather than present the recommendations, that you pause and we talk about any questions, and then we present the recommendations and make any edits as we go. I think that will be better in terms of how to get this done in 40 minutes.
Right, and it might make sense for us to then switch to the way the recommendations are presented in your document.
Sure.
Rather than in mine, because I kind of split it up between responses to the Bureau questions and recommendations.
Okay, so the first recommendation that you made was a response to one of the questions.
Right, yeah.
When we get to that, then I'll just share the screen and you can speak from that from the Google Doc. Is that okay?
Okay, yeah, if I can see it.
Oh, well, if you can't, then I'll read it.
All right. You could actually increase that, where it says 100% up at the top, you can raise that to 200 or so.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Somebody else had asked about that as well. Okay. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the other members of the committee who contributed to this presentation. They're listed here. Next slide. Before explaining what the IRS use case was, I want to provide a bit of background in the form of context. Many agencies, which include both federal and state agencies, provide the Census Bureau with microdata. And the Census Bureau uses these data to investigate potential improvements to its data collection programs. That's partly in Title 26. What do the agencies get back from the Bureau in return? Well, in some cases, the Census Bureau links the agency data to its internal files, performs analysis with the linked data, and then gives back the agency some statistical summaries. In some cases, there may also be collaborative research between the Census Bureau and the agency staff. But historically, what the Census Bureau has not done is send back census or survey microdata that the agency can link to its own data. Obviously, data that the agency could link to its own data is by definition identifiable to that agency, and sending identifiable census data would violate Title 13. Next slide. There are a couple of potential ways that the Bureau could address that problem. One would be to modify the linkage methodology so that the linked record pairs are not always correct. Doing so would not require altering the distribution of the variable of interest. The alternative, which is what the Bureau did in this IRS use case, was to introduce error into the Census Bureau variables themselves on correctly linked records. And that's what the Bureau did for the IRS use case. In this example, the Census Bureau provided IRS data with data on race and ethnicity, and these data come from its best race and ethnicity file. What this file is for most of the population of the United States, the race and ethnicity that were reported on the previous census or survey. So it's a really unique and valuable resource, and that's particularly so for agencies, given the generally poor quality of administrative data on race and ethnicity. Next slide. This description of the IRS use case is based not only on the presentation that the Census Bureau provided in the slide presentation that's on our website, but also the Bureau's response to questions that the committee posed back in March. The IRS use case is presented as an example of privacy-protected linkable microdata, and that's kind of how we want to look at this. What the use case involved was the following steps. The IRS sent the Bureau a file of unique identifiers. The Bureau then assigned protected identification keys to these records. And if you're not familiar with PICs, they are a unique identification system used only by the Census Bureau that is used for all of its internal linkage. The Bureau then linked these PICs to a recoded version of the BREF and extracted a 10-category race ethnicity variable. The Bureau then applied a protection algorithm to this race ethnicity variable, and they did so using a privacy loss budget that could be described by an epsilon value of 2. The Census Bureau then returned to the IRS its original file, but with this protected race ethnicity variable appended. Next slide. So the mechanism of privacy protection that was applied to this IRS use case was called multinomial randomized response. And randomized response is a survey technique that was developed back in the 1960s as a way of getting unbiased responses from respondents to questions about sensitive behavior like drug use and sexual activity of different types. And the basic idea behind randomized response was that the question of interest was posed in at least 2 different ways, and a respondent was randomly assigned one of these methods. And the methods could be designed so that a yes response meant performing the behavior in one case, and a yes response would mean not performing the behavior in the other case. And so neither the survey taker nor the survey organization would know what the respondent actually responded, but because of the way that the methodology was designed, it would be possible to extract at the aggregate level what the true distribution of these responses were and get an estimate of the behavior in question. So as it was applied by the Census Bureau in this case, each person on the data supplied by the IRS had some probability of getting the correct race ethnicity and the residual probability of getting an incorrect answer. In this case, one of 9 different incorrect answers. And the probability could be described by this formula where you can see how epsilon comes into play. And so with an epsilon of 2, this formula leads a probability of 0.451 for being a correct race ethnicity and 6.1% for the probability of getting one of the incorrect responses. So in other words, 45% of the answers were going to be correct, but the IRS would not know which were correct or not. But because each of the alternative incorrect values is chosen with the same probability, the effect is that the distributions of the original and privacy protected values can really differ substantially. Next slide. So just to show what this might mean, I took estimates of the race ethnicity distribution from the American Community Survey for these particular years. There were 7 categories for this race ethnicity distribution. So with the formula shown on the previous slide, the probability of someone having a correct answer is 55%, and the probability of getting each one of the alternatives is 7.5%. So you can see as a result, for example, for whites, the observed probability percentage was close to 61%. That becomes 36% in the file that would have been delivered. For really small groups like the American Indian Alaska Native group, which is under 1% in the true distribution, what's rendered in this protected distribution is close to 8%. Next slide. Now, while the distribution of the privacy protected values can differ very substantially from the true distribution, it is possible, because the protection mechanism is known, that the original aggregate distribution can be recovered. The same way that when this method was applied to survey data to get an estimate of sensitive behavior, one could get back the right answer or close to that for the whole population. That could also be applied to subpopulations, but it's generally not very useful for most of the analysis that an agency might want to conduct. So because of that, the Census Bureau developed some software that could largely correct analytic estimates for the error that was induced by this privacy protection mechanism. And this software, which they gave a name to, was provided to the IRS. Next slide. So the Census Bureau addressed 2 questions to CSAC, and we wanted to respond the way we used to the 2 different questions. One was, are there alternative methodologies to consider for either the creation or the analysis of privacy-protected linkable microdata? And the second question was, given the large privacy loss budget that's already spent on race and ethnicity data from the 2020 census, how could the Census Bureau justify sharing the privacy-protected BREF that uses 2020 census data? And Barbara, maybe before switching to your document, can we move to the next slide, or
Sure.
2 slides? I think 2 slides. One more. And then one after that. Okay, because in addition to responding to the questions that the Bureau asked, we went beyond that. And basically, we thought that it would be helpful to know if the IRS had found this shared race ethnicity data useful. Unfortunately, given the current administration's de-emphasis of race and ethnicity, it's likely to be some time before the IRS can really answer that question. It's also likely to be the case that the Census Bureau sharing linkable BREF data anytime soon is similarly unlikely. So we focused on the broader concept of privacy-protected linkable microdata, and then also the privacy implications of further additional releases of 2020 census data that needs to be formally assessed. So now I think you can go to your document, Barbara.
Okay, great. Taylor, could you take down perfect. And John, thank you for the suggestion to increase the font size. So let me know if this works for you. Is that better?
Work for other people?
I can increase it more. Would you like me to increase it more, John?
Maybe slightly.
Sure.
Yeah. Just so we keep 1 on a page.
How's that?
I don't know if it changed, but it's okay.
Then it changed.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I'll go back. Just put on 1 page.
150 is good. Okay.
So go ahead. You can.
Okay, so in response to the first question, we ended up with this recommendation that I-CSAC recommends that the Bureau explore alternative methodologies that could retain the original distribution of the BREF data. One such approach is to synthesize the race ethnicity variable, perhaps with multiple imputation. Another approach is to introduce error into the linkage mechanism rather than the BREF variable. Analytical models exist for accounting for error in the analysis of data obtained by synthesis or privacy-protected record linkage.
Great. So we'll just try as an experiment. Does anyone have a question about this one before we go on?
Barbara, maybe you can see people. I can't
Yeah,
see.
I know you can't. And I can. I don't see anybody. So go ahead, John.
Okay. The second recommendation considered broader implications of the Bureau's approach. Recommendation 7 here is I-CSAC recommends that the Bureau clarify whether the IRS use case is a prototype for other applications or a one-time effort. And the basic idea here is it matters if we're only looking at this use case, which probably won't be repeated, or if this is to be considered a model for something in the future. Unfortunately, we don't have the Bureau's answer, but
Well, it's a fair question to ask.
yes.
And any questions about that? Okay, go ahead, John.
Next one is that the I-CSAC recommends that the Bureau prepare a white paper describing the methodology in more detail. And we specifically were asking that the white paper address what are the overall goals, what features of the IRS as the recipient agency guided the design, what threat model are you addressing, and how are proposed algorithmic processes consistent with this threat model? I should note that the Bureau indicated back at the time that they did plan to prepare a paper. They just haven't gotten there yet, but we still think that they should take account of these. And I wanted to note in particular that giving data to the IRS isn't like putting it out to the public. And maybe this means less than it used to, given that, 4 or 5 IRS commissioners resigned in the last few months over data sharing. But it would be worth the Bureau noting if there's anything about the fact that the IRS is the recipient and has Title 26 protections of data that would make this case different from what they might consider in giving data to, say, the Department of Education or Health and Human Services.
So John, is that something you would want to add, for example, to recommendation number 7, where you might say?
No, I don't think I'd add it but that's why we're asking about the IRS as the recipient agency.
Okay. Any questions, concerns about these?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a comment. Like I think in terms of sort of like a what else the white paper should include, because our topic is more specifically about the privacy loss budget, I would like to also see it including like a consideration of why it chose the like a particular privacy loss budget it did of 2, and sort of what are the considerations and the weights going into that, and where that value 2 came from.
Rachel, that's actually in a later recommendation.
Oh, okay.
But
In that case,
maybe
I'm
when we
more
get there, you
okay.
can see if the
Okay,
white
good.
paper
If
is the
that's
right
coming
place to
later,
put
then
it.
that's fine.
That's great. Any other questions about this one? Yes, Gwen.
Just a quick question. Did we want to add in the language something about it being commingled data and how it subjects then to Title 13 and 26?
We could ask them to comment on the commingling aspect. It's staying within that pair of agencies, but it still might be worth asking. Let's see. Maybe after what features of the IRS as the recipient agency guided the design. how was the fact that these are commingled data addressed?
Okay, I just wrote down what you said, John. And I see
Right.
Ron has his hand up. Are you wanting to comment on this, Ron, or a different issue?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on this.
Great.
There's a different threat model though as well. And as John was talking, it's how do you decide if you're ever going to do this again in the future? The threat model is how does that impact the perception of respondents to provide information to the Census Bureau, knowing that their data are being linked and distributed to other agencies? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So is that in the white paper?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
How is the decision made to selectively link? What factors are involved in assessing risk, not just the risk of disclosure, but the risk of doing it at all.
Okay. What types of Okay, I just tried, Ron. It may not capture exactly what you meant. So I'm just adding what types of risk are taken into account.
Or maybe to say, how does the release of census data to another agency, or how might this affect census response rates if this were known? That's kind of what you're getting at, Ron.
That's exactly what I'm getting at.
How about just what are the risks to future participation in census data collection? Okay, does that capture it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Good,
you.
Ron, thanks.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Number 9, John.
Okay. This gets into some of the details of differential privacy. I-CSAC recommends that the Bureau define its interpretation of local differential privacy in this application. In particular, the distinction between local differential privacy as an algorithmic design pattern, for example, randomized response, versus a threat model should be made explicit. And I can add that where this comes from is that local differential privacy is understood a variety of different ways from what Rachel and Jonathan have explained, and Claire too. And it would be good to know exactly what the Bureau means here and how it's using it.
Any comments about that one? Okay, 10.
And then related to this, I-CSAC recommends that the Bureau reassess whether local differential privacy is the appropriate privacy model for its intended goals.
That sort of implies that you don't think that it is, but that's okay.
That was sort of the group's sense.
Okay. All right. Any concerns about that one? All right. Go ahead, John.
Okay, here's getting to Rachel's comment. I-CSAC recommends that the Bureau provide a fuller explanation of the chosen privacy loss budget of 2 in this case, epsilon 2. And I guess we could wonder if this should be up in the white paper? I mean, we're starting to pull apart what we think the white paper should include versus broader questions that the Bureau could answer. But maybe people think this should all be in the white paper.
I would leave it there because they could avoid it in the white paper more readily.
Okay, and then Rachel, this next part is part of that one. I guess I should have read
Yeah.
that.
And actually for 11, I would modify the phrasing slightly to
Sure.
clarify we'd like a fuller explanation of the reasoning behind the choice or the sort of like a decision-making process that led to the choice rather than the like implications of the choice because they could explain like epsilon equals 2 means blah and they're done. But we're interested in sort of like why is this the right number for the use case? Yeah.
Yeah, that helps clarify the intent.
And you need a the before reasoning.
Okay, thank
I
you.
have a question. I'm sorry, I don't know how to make my virtual hand go up. So
Oh,
if for some reason it's
It's
not
under
allowed.
reactions at the bottom.
I know, but it's not letting me. It just has a recognize hand gestures option. It's really weird. Anyway, I just have a question. Should there be alternatives to LDP offered for consideration?
I don't think we had any because we didn't have a full enough understanding of what they meant.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it means either, but I was just wondering. Okay. I just wondered if you all talked about other ways of
I think in the spirit of sort of like, there are many different like a disclosure avoidance tools available as we saw in the first topic. And sort of like the right tool will depend on the particular goals of the application. I think that we didn't really get enough clarity on on the goals and the reasoning and things like threat models. Um, to really make a different recommendation, which is a part of why we're sort of asking for this white paper about sort of like precisely what is the problem they're trying to solve here.
So I wonder then if it would be helpful to say recommending that the Bureau reassess whether LDP and or justify its use as the appropriate privacy model. I don't know. I mean, something that would allow us to know what other options are. Like, I don't know if that would be useful.
Yeah. I mean, one possibility that I would conjecture they might want to use instead, but I wouldn't like concretely recommend it because I think we like haven't received enough information would be like a central model of a differential privacy, which is very similar, and some of the things they're doing it might like fit into that already, but it has some like a slightly different like technical nuances that it seems like might work better for their use case. But again, I didn't receive enough information about precisely their goals that I wouldn't want to like strongly recommend it at this point.
so how about this as a change? The Bureau should reassess whether LDP is the appropriate privacy model for its intended goals and what the alternatives might be. How would you like that?
That would be nice. I think that would be nice. I think that would allow us to know what they're weighing it against or what the other options might be that we think might be better.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everybody okay with that friendly amendment? Okay, good. Let's see. I think we're on 12, John.
Right. I-CSAC recommends that the Bureau provide more information on the software it developed to enable analysis of the privacy-protected linkable microdata.
Any questions or comments about that one?
We know nothing at all, and I actually tried to find out how useful it had been to the IRS, and I didn't get back an answer yet.
Okay. All right, I don't see any hands so why don't we go ahead, John?
Okay. I-CSAC recommends that before considering sharing a privacy-protected breath that uses 2020 census data, the Bureau should first establish that the IRS has found the previously delivered data useful.
Any questions, concerns about that? It seems pretty straightforward. Okay. And
I
then,
would say, and if not, why? Because we'd want to know.
Yeah, good idea.
I mean, they could answer with one sentence, one word. It wasn't useful.
no is the answer. Yeah. Okay. So I added that.
Okay.
Okay, and then the last recommendation gets into the notion that back when the Census Bureau was developing its disclosure protection for 2020, there was at least an illusion for making some allowance for future undefined releases of 2020 census data. And this gets into that. So following on the last public releases of 2020 census data, I-CSAC recommends that the Bureau develop an approach to assessing the possibility of limited additional releases of 2020 census data in light of their potential contribution to the overall privacy loss. Such releases might include linkable microdata similar to the IRS use case and results of individual research projects requiring linked data.
Comments, questions about this one? John, do you want me to include that such releases might include into the recommendation itself?
Yes, I think I generally meant for those.
Okay.
Yeah, there may have been some other recommendations that were like that.
There were, but some of them were like elaborating where
Oh, okay.
data was,
Yeah.
but this one, just the way you were talking about it, seemed like it needed to be part of the recommendation. Okay, this one seems like a big one to me, especially since you bring in the individual research projects requiring linked data. I think that's potentially significant. So in some ways, for me, this really stands out as a big recommendation, important.
I wonder if we might add, when we say additional releases of 2020 census data, just say data products to kind of fit into the idea that something that's citable and as opposed to just here's some more data or here's an example. So in the middle line, just say data, additional releases of 2020.
Barbara, I think Lance meant that lower.
Yeah, I meant right there. Yeah, that's the one I was talking about.
I'll take it out here.
Yeah, that's fine. So thanks. I think that is fitting into the overall terminology.
Sure. Any other comments here?
Yeah, so that actually addressed the comment I had with John, whether you intended, with the use of the microdata similar to the, their best race ethnicity file, right? And it said public, the idea would be it would be public use data. That's what I went to, as opposed to restricted use data, restricted access data through the data centers. And whether you want, but data products fixes that, I think, by making it more general.
And I don't think we really know how the Bureau is viewing letting people access these data through the research data centers.
Yeah, I don't think we do. And I don't think we fully understand how this privacy budget gets established. And
yeah, because it's a different release. It's
oh yeah,
it's a link.
Yes, true. Okay. Any other comments that anyone wants to make about this set of recommendations? Okay, so thank you, John. I really appreciate your presentation, and now I'll be able to see the comments, which I wasn't able to see. So I think we're ready to vote on the on the recommendations. And Taylor was asking us this time to raise our hands in our in our little boxes so that people who are watching can see. They can't see the icons of the hands raised is the thing. So all in favor of accepting these recommendations? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, excellent. So that was extremely efficient. Well done. Thanks again, John, and thanks to everyone. And we have now a break. So we will get back at 4:05 sharp Eastern Daylight Time. And then Deborah will lead us in a discussion of the environmental impacts. So enjoy your break and see you soon. Great. I can see that we're gathering again. Is Deborah here? Yes, there's Deborah. Perfect.
I am.
Yes.
I was just unmuting.
Perfect. So we now switch to our third topic, which is the environmental impacts frame. And Deborah Balk will be presenting, serving as discussant. And she'll present about half of her slide deck, and then we'll move, again, as we did the last time, to the Google Doc, which contains the recommendations. Also, we're in the slide deck. So take it away, Deborah.
Great, thank you, Barbara. So I'm going to be presenting remarks on behalf of our small subset of the I-CSAC, representing myself, Sarah, Gwen, Kristen, Patricia Moy, who's not with us, who couldn't make today's meeting, Ron, and Bonnie. So in the top part of the slide, you see 3 of the publications that our presentation is based on, as well as the actual data product itself. And the very last slide, should I not get to it because we are going to leave the slide deck, there are links to those papers for anybody who would like to see, and a link to the data set. Next slide, please. So this overview of the project, next slide again, is based on our understanding of the slide deck that was given to us in advance of the meeting that we would have had in March 2025 before it was canceled. We had those. We had been delivered a slide deck, and then there was a supporting white paper, and subsequent to there have been some additional progress made. So we've tried to do due diligence and understand that content. The general idea behind this environmental impacts frame is that it provides critical information during or before a disaster, and that it has many possible usages to prepare for disasters, but also to support some real-time analysis. And so this is an example shown to the right of Florida during Hurricane Milton, where there was a forecast of excess rainfall, the darker hues representing the highest excess rain impact expected. And the environmental impact frame takes data that from a blended, builds an infrastructure from blended data products that allow, just to look at that map for a moment, all the census data products come in blocks or block groups or tracts or counties or states. They don't come in these, they don't follow the band of an environmental, of a weather event, of an extreme weather event, of or other environmental or exposures at all. So therefore, the idea is to take the underlying census data products and create a system whereby you can mix and match those data to then get estimates. So in the table, we see not just they're able to estimate population by, in this case, shown major race and major age groups to assist in the that will be exposed that are at least in the high forecast zone of this extreme precipitation event, and then the flash flooding to it that is expected to ensue afterward. So this is a way of taking those original census data and creating grids to produce these kinds of tables, or you can produce graphics from them. So it uses it builds an infrastructure from these blended data products. And another really important feature of these data sets is it's annualized. In the past 25, it's annualized data roughly covering the past 25 years. And I want to make a comment about the data being annualized. By blending these data products, they are unlike many of the other data sets that would typically be used, say the data from small geographic data from the decennial census every 10 years, or the American Community Survey, which comes in 5-year, or, for example, 5-year estimates. So it's representing a population over a 5-year period. This is annualized data, and it's produced at a small geography. So both of those things allow for more up-to-date and more spatially precise estimation of where the population is. Next slide, please. So the idea for the approach that behind the environmental impacts frame is that the Census Bureau wanted to produce the best possible population estimate at the finest geographic scale possible over the longest period of time, and then with environmental data that covering the broadest set of environmental circumstances. So and then what they developed was a data infrastructure that links administrative records, survey data, as well and other census data, and combine it with the environmental data. Often it's satellite derived that has national coverage with an annual temporal coverage from 1999 to the present. Some of the data series go to 2003, 2020, 2023, others 2024. It's very current. I think maybe even there's one beyond that. Next slide, please. To understand it, it's a series of modular data sets. So the core modules are based on the demographic spine, which combined with residential histories and environmental conditions. The demographic spine, the base of it is all Social Security holders in the census numerals. It's derived from a Social Security Administration records on applications for Social Security numbers. It contains date of birth, place of birth, date of death, if applicable, and sex. And then that is supplemented with the census best race and ethnicity file that John Chaika mentioned in the last presentation, which is a composite file constructed from a variety of census survey and administrative records. And so that's sort of what is you don't see the output, the inputs, you only see the output, but those are the inputs that allow us to create this annualized series. And then the extended content should be linkable to establishment level data like businesses, longitudinal business databases, other economic characteristics from the IRS. And in fact, there is some information already on income available in the outcome, one of the outcome grids, and then additional outcomes on housing, for example. So some of those things, yes, we see. These were their hopes as we understand it. So some of them we see already, some of them we don't. Next slide, please. On the environmental hazards and amenities side, the organizing principle here was for harmonizing environmental variables to a 0.01 degree grid where possible, but working with native resolution for more detailed data. And the current categories that they were working with included air quality, such as PM 2.5 and PM 10, various kinds of fine particulate matter. Excuse me. Natural disaster and extreme weather events, hurricanes, wind fields, environmental risks, flood risks following hurricanes, for example, toxic and stationary sources like Superfund sites, and amenities such as urban tree canopy. So, and then also in progress, they were thinking about waterborne hazards. Next slide, please. So I can't speak to where they stand in terms of what what's next on the docket, but we do know that publicly available are these gridded data at roughly 1 kilometer spatial resolution from 1999 to 2023-24. Population, the grids, these gridded outputs are available by age, sex, and race through 2024. There are only 3 age categories, so under 18, 18 to 64, and 65 and over. And there are 6 combined race groups consistent with OMB classifications. There's also population by race and income classification through 2024. And then there's a variety of environmental hazards. And again, the particulate matter is one example of one that's already available. So there's also some real-time information that is still in a test phase. Importantly, all of these data sets are available in a Parquet file format. And we'll talk about that in a minute. The microdata that underlie this frame are not available and never will be available to the general public because they're privacy protected. We've heard a lot about disclosure avoidance systems, but some of the microdata, some parts of the microdata frame, to our understanding, will be made available in the Federal Statistical Research Data Centers for users to use. So the frame will be available for people who go through the FSRDC clearance process to use and perhaps produce additional outcomes. But we don't know a lot about that either since at this point. Next slide, please. Apart from intention. So we were asked in the canceled, before the canceled March meeting, the questions that were posed to CSAC then was, or are there any additional, is there additional information on people, businesses, or the environment that we should incorporate into the microdata infrastructure or the public facing products? And how best to reach potential users for public products or researchers interested in the microdata? So those were the two questions that we were asked, and we've taken those questions both literally and then expanded upon them as well. So I know we're going to switch to the Google Doc, but before doing that, if you wouldn't mind just going just to the for a moment, just to I can address this in the Google Doc, but our recommendations fall into 3 different categories that are classified here. One set is looking at the issues associated with documentation, transparency, and user guidance. That's first up. And then we had some, then there's another section soon to feed, a bunch of them are there. Then specifically to addressing this issue of incorporating other data sets. And lastly, we follow up with some methodological recommendations, which we weren't exactly asked for, but we felt we made anyway. So, and as I said, the last slide indicates the URLs for finding these resources that we, the ones that are still available at the Census website, including the data product. So I'm happy to go read through the recommendations for us.
Sure. Thank you so much, Deborah. I really appreciate that. Let's see.
Sure.
The recommendation.
I mean, Barbara, I assume you'd like me to read through them, right?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay.
It's just if there are changes,
Sure.
you can make them.
Yeah, great. Great. So, so I guess at the, just maybe, can you just skip a tiny bit above, there's one little preamble that's before that. So for people who are, there. So just, I'll just read this. So sorry, but so the gridded EIF, it's a novel privacy protected data set and made available in a spatial format, in this spatial data in a grid file format. It's derived from the Census Bureau's confidential EIF microdata infrastructure, which is not publicly available. The EIF combines this comprehensive administrative records and survey data on the US population with high resolution geospatial information on environmental hazards to produce annualized grids at the spatial resolution of a kilometer roughly for the past 25 years. The intent of the data is to help the nation, including but not limited to federal, state, and local governments, prepare and respond to environmental exposures. By combining demographic data, age, sex, race, and income, using both administrative and survey data, these gridded data provide a more up-to-date and demographically nuanced view of the population than would be available in other publicly available aggregated demographic data products. And I just want to pause for a moment because that's a significant offering of these data set. Complementing the demographic grids are also the environmental exposure grids, also important, making it easy to combine the grids for analysis and planning purposes. So we'll start with our I-CSAC applauds the Bureau for developing the EIF, both for its application to environmental exposures, but also more broadly. Notably, gridded data allow for greater collaboration with a wider variety of data users from federal agencies and beyond. The high resolution temporal and spatial data through the grid system reduce risk of disclosure while also allowing for targeted planning, facilitating program assessments, and helping businesses make more informed decisions. Grids allow for more flexible combinations of data that is without boundaries for demarcating exposures, risks, and a variety of user-specified geographies. And again, I'll add ones that are not necessarily environmentally oriented. They could be any geography. A school district is a geography in the same way as a hurricane path could be. I-CSAC looks forward to continued development of this exciting new line of data products and the microdata becoming available within the FSRDC. The following suggestions focus ways to improve transparency and a wide usage of these data. So our I-CSAC recommends the Bureau acknowledge the potential error introduced by the undercounted groups in the administrative data. Those include notably young children, low-income individuals, including non-tax filers, persons with disability are likely contenders for undercount. And this transparency may increase the public's trust in the use of these data. I-CSAC recommends clarifying the content in the frames used to create the gridded data, whether these groups and types of establishments include group quarters like schools, hospitals, senior centers, so the users know what they're looking at. A fuller set of documentation will make the gridded data more useful to a broader user community.
Great.
Maybe
Yeah.
let's pause. Yeah.
Let's see if there are any questions or comments or friendly amendments or to the two recommendations that are here.
This is Salima.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I have a comment regarding number 15. Based off of your presentation, there was a question about which data to include in this tool, and specifically regarding other populations. So if we could somehow amend 15 to say not only the potential error introduced or undercounted groups, but to include these groups in the first place, because it wasn't clear that these groups were included.
I think every group, if there's data on these groups, they are included. They're not intentionally omitting any group.
Okay, great.
It's just there are some inherent shortcomings in some of the underlying data that are known. You know, like not everyone files taxes, for example. That kind of, it's not like they're trying to, since the tax information, the IRS linkage allows for the identifying the annualized location of individuals, and therefore more up-to-date spatial representation of where people are. But since if you're not a tax filer, you would be omitted. So there's some systematic bias associated.
Okay.
So yeah,
John?
That's my understanding. John?
It wasn't clear to me that the data were strictly administrative data.
That's correct, John. They're not strictly. There is also survey data that are used.
So you should include after undercounted groups in survey and in census, survey and administrative.
Sure. Thank you. I think that's correct. Yeah. Yeah, basically if any of the, obviously the reason for the frame itself is to combine data in a way that allows us to improve accuracy of potential undercounts, but all of these different data, that's right. And we've discussed this at prior CSAC meetings, that was discussed a lot, but each data product they use would have its own potential limitation. Thank you.
Other comments on 15 or 16? Go ahead.
Great. Okay, so I myself might want to do a little editing on this one. So the Bureau has a long tradition of making data dictionaries available with any data set releases, but none could be found to accompany these new gridded data products, like a standard data dictionary. So, and just as a pause, the data that are available, there's a R data file, but there's that, and maybe, but not every user is going to be an R data user. We'll talk about the open source stuff in a minute, but anyhow, so we don't, as it's written now, we don't actually say we want standard documentation. So I think probably we want to add that. I'm just putting a pin in that because I think that's something we probably have to add to combine with one of the other recommendations. So given that the methodology, though, to produce the grids is based on administrative data in the EIF, which differs from other census data products, such as the decennial census in the subpopulations captured, users are informed in the Bureau's documentation. Maybe we want to change that to the Bureau's white papers, because that's really what they are. That sums the grids, thank you. That sums the grids of that the sums of the gridded data products may result in different population totals at some levels of geography. So for people who do this kind of work, this will not be surprising to them, but if somebody is new to using these data, they would definitely want to know. Thus, CSAC recommends the Bureau provide more content to understand how the gridded data are useful as a complement to other key census data products, such as the American Community Survey and the decennial census. I-CSAC further recommends greater transparency in documentation regarding differences in population totals at various geographies in order to inform fitness of use. And I-CSAC recommends changing the name to Census Gridded Data Products, given the broad applicability of this approach to leverage linkages to multiple federal and other data sources for maximum insights on program policy and business analysis and planning. And so the current name EIF is needlessly limiting. So, and before just opening it up for discussion on these 3 points, I would just like to say that we as a subcommittee really felt that other countries' national statistical offices produce and disseminate gridded data products, and I-CSAC would really like to see the US become a leader in this space. So I'm going to pause, and I also think we should make a more direct, specific recommendation on the standard documentation.
Okay, do you want to try and do that, Deborah, or maybe somebody else in your group?
Yeah, I will. Whoever in our working group feels like writing it. It's just like like any other documentation, just like let's add one. I mean, if others have comments, I can happily do it, but I would love to try to respond to those if I'm able to.
Yeah, Andrew, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it was back to the recommendation 17. Is it worth going a little bit further? All right, so disability is not going to be a variable in there unless it's coming from Social Security files or type of institutional group quarter, because the disability measures aren't on the decennial census and aren't likely to be anytime soon. If I was using these data, I would want to crosswalk with the PUMAs so that I could then bring it over to the ACS. And so I'm wondering if 17 could mention crosswalks or, crosswalks of these grids with the PUMAs if they.
Sure, I think that's a great suggestion. I mean, the PUMAs are well used, right, and they allow for use of microdata. So again, it allows for people to, rather than aggregates of pre-existing geographies. So yeah, so I see no reason not to to specify the public, the PUMA files.
And necessary allocation weights for each of those, for those.
Yes. I think so, and great. I'm trying to get into the document myself while looking at the Zoom screen.
It should be okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Good. So I think we can start with right. So we're really trying to mimic the usual meeting with a little real-time editing. So let's see.
We really
that's
are.
Great. We are. So I think we can say, I think just to your point, I think Andrew, I think the point is to make it's both like it's the ACS and decennial census data aggregates. Maybe we can just say aggregates and micro data via PUMA or microdata PUMA, something like that.
Crosswalk or something.
Or PUMA, yeah. Or
I mean, they can certainly aggregate. I mean, I would be happy if they just aggregated it themselves. Give us the variables at the PUMA level.
I mean, and the PUMAs change too. They're not stable, right? So crosswalks
they're not.
Although these data are very flexible, right? They're gridded, so you can create your own.
Yeah, I'd love to do, because a lot of the times the PUMAs aren't.
I mean, right. So like the crosswalk, like these data could be aggregated by any geography you produce. So I think maybe it's really like and it's not so much but it's guidance on crosswalks.
And guidance on crosswalks for other geographic
Yeah, for other geographic units and then
Units, yeah.
e.g. Pumas.
Right. Yeah. Congressional districts.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
How vulnerable is my congressional district?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Okay. There we go. Something like that.
Great.
Okay.
Other comments on what's now 17 to 20?
Okay. Continuing. Sorry, we have a few more.
Yep. I know.
Right. So I-CSAC commends the use of the Parquet file format, and as it's open source and can handle very large file sizes required for such fine scale gridded data. This is an important innovation for products from the Bureau. However, many users are going to need assistance in using this format since it's a relatively new format for social scientists and applied data users. I-CSAC therefore recommends supplying example open source code, for example, in R, which is the easiest. These data can be read very easily by R, illustrating how to ingest and use these data and leveraging the Bureau's Data Gems video to lower the barriers to entry and bring new users into the. And just a related issue, if you try to ingest the data set currently, like for any one of them, it's large, even in this Parquet format, because it's the entire country. And so like users, if you're unfamiliar with some of the coding environment, you might just want to extract, like you can't say, I just want my state, for example. So that's a secondary point, but that's something that the GEMS video could do very nicely, or a line of code, to establish how to clip to an extent of interest. So any comments before moving on?
There are 10 million square kilometers in the United States, just for reference.
Large. So, yeah, right. I mean,
yeah, I think that looks good. And you could be more specific in all of what you might want to see in their examples, but you wouldn't want to limit it either. Okay, there you go.
I'm just adding perhaps by showcasing how to extract to a geography of interest, to a geographic extent. I mean, of interest. Well, never mind. That's fine. That's fine. Right. It's just, I think it's one of these things where you can, so let's say you have a line of code, a very little code to say open the data file, and it's so large, if you're a new user, you're just going to get stuck. And that's not the intent. The intent is to lower barriers. So, okay. Additionally, ancillary data would be helpful in preparing for and responding to disasters and their aftermaths. These data could help by locating populations at risk through the identification of roads, public transportation, shelters, nursing homes, hospitals, etc., or in helping to mitigate environmental challenges by identifying areas with protective geophysical characteristics, for example, data on tree canopy, which, as we saw, was in their list, their to-do list, but to my knowledge is not yet available. So I-CSAC recommends the Bureau collaborate with other agencies to link with GIS and other possible ancillary data layers that would be effective in the above domains, that is, help to locate hazards or populations at risk, or provide potential protection from environmental exposures. And
any comments on that?
A period.
So. Any comments on recommendation number 22?
Okay, we're almost done. So the list of potential grids that could be included in the EIF is large, but additional data about persons that are harder to reach in the wake of extreme events, such as persons with disability, could be added to the gridded data so that services can be effectively provided in times of emergency. I-CSAC recommends the Bureau consider incorporating the depth of data available in the ACS and the decennial census with the EIF by the MAF ID in order to create additional grids that would fill an unmet data need. So we identified persons with disability. It's, for example, a question in the ACS, but not available elsewhere. And persons with disability in times of emergencies are harder to reach sometimes, and therefore, that is why that example is given. It is obviously not an exhaustive list. There.
Comments on recommendation number 23?
Just clarification, it's asking for bigger grids so that more ACS type data could be
different attributes.
Different attributes could be
not bigger, not necessarily bigger, just like, so the current grid products are like, there's a grid by age and sex, and then there's then there's a grid by age, sex, race, and then there's race, income. Then they are these data products that are, have these 3 large age groups. So maybe it could be 3 large age groups by persons who self-identify as having any disability, or maybe different kinds of disability. And maybe those grids would have to be at a coarser resolution.
Because that's my thought, is that if it's impossible to do, because the ACS is a lot smaller than the census and the IRS files, so I would take bigger grids, over nothing. So
sure. So the idea here, though, is that this is a flexible system, and so and we're getting to this point in a comment. This is, maybe we blend these. Just maybe hold the thought until you see another comment coming up. Great.
Yes, Salima.
So in our research on communications access, specifically with regards to emergency communications, it's not just in the wake of extreme events that people with disabilities and other populations are hard to reach, but it's in advance of. So I'd love for this to reflect, proactive as well as retroactive needs. And they are harder to reach.
Great. Yes, and it's absolutely sure.
Yes, thank you.
Right, great. We've tried to use that language in some other places. Thank you for making sure it gets here too. That's right. Okay. In the interest of time, shall we move? Yeah. Okay. Good. The methodological approaches explored in the early reports showed consideration for new challenges introduced with administrative data and privacy protections at such small, equal-sized geographic unit spread continuously across the nation. Additional experiments to overcome the missing information from administrative data and small populations may be useful. Maybe there's something grammatically incorrect with that sentence. Maybe useful considerations, but hold on. So the 2 recommendations are number 24. I-CSAC recommends the Bureau consider methodologies or weights to adjust for population with missing age or sex from the administrative data, which include hard to count populations. We could expand that to include the other parts of the EIF frame, but the administrative data are noted in some of the documentation, so that's why we refer to them specifically. And then I think there's one more right below that. Is there not? And I see. Oh no, a couple more, right? Yeah, but these are all methodological. So
yeah, but it looks. John, do you have a comment on this one? No. Okay. I just was wondering if you did. All right. Here we go.
Okay, so smoothing across 1 degree grids, 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers may further exacerbate misrepresentation of populations missing from or misclassified in administrative data. Further, the gridding approach could be flexible to maximize utility. So, for example, urban areas would be better served with even finer resolution gridded output, whereas rural areas could have improved content accuracy at coarser resolution. So I-CSAC recommends testing different infusions by population types or experimenting with variable resolution grids. And then I-CSAC recommends, I-CSAC recommends clarity on the geographic size of the net output, that is negative grid cells for noise infusion if the privacy protection allows. So, at this point, I think that this trade-off between the size of the output grid and the feature being represented in that grid is a real, this gets a little bit back to the point, I think, Andrew, that you were raising. Oh, you're muted.
Yes, thank you.
Comments on 24, 25, or 26? Maybe everybody's just getting tired at the end of the meeting. I don't know. But are we any comments on any of Deborah's presentation? I don't want to take this down until we're ready. Okay, I guess we're ready to vote. Taylor, would you mind taking, it's up to me. Yeah, okay. All right. Everybody's here and we're ready to vote. And the question is, does I-CSAC approve the recommendations that have just been reviewed? So please raise your hands in your little box if you are approving. Great, perfect. Thank you so much. We have unanimous support for all of the recommendations as they exist in the file now. And so the next step will be that they'll be posted and they'll be forwarded to the Census Bureau. So I want to say, my goodness, I-CSAC, we have accomplished a lot in 3 short hours. Congratulations to all of us. I just think it's remarkable what we've done here. Very much along the lines of a traditional CSAC style meeting. So I'm really super pleased that we've managed to get here. So Ron was asking in the chat about, what's next. I am, we'll begin talking about a spring meeting shortly. It would be in March. The exact date we need to figure out, but it would be another Thursday, most likely at 2 o'clock, because that seems to be a time that works for all of our time zones. And that's a typical day that the original CSAC would have met. I don't want to do Friday. That's not a good choice. As for topics, I'll be in touch with all of you individually about that and also your debrief on this meeting. But the question is, would we be open to suggestions, from others about what we should talk about? And my feeling is, of course, yes. So maybe there could be something on our website that would enable people to make suggestions. I would caveat in one way, we need something to comment on. And so what we need is a white paper or a webinar or something like that has been produced by the Bureau that's out in the public domain that we can then respond and react to. So that's the one caveat when we think of of what we might discuss at a next meeting, but we'll be in touch about that. Before I move on with my thank yous, any response to that? Any feelings about that? Okay, so some thank yous are in order. First of all, thanks to the committee. Thank you for hanging in there. It's been a rigorous afternoon. I want to thank our 4 discussants, Lance Waller, Claire Bowen, John Chaika, and Deborah Balk. You did an amazing job. Really, really impressive. Each of you led a subcommittee of devoted I-CSAC members that prepared the slide decks that were presented and developed an initial draft of the recommendations. This was a significant lift. All of us are volunteers, and almost all of us have day jobs. So, so we did this, on top of everything else that we're doing. But we all benefited from the wisdom and experience of our 4 champion discussants. I want to acknowledge again and thank Holden Thorpe, although I know he's not with us anymore, but he did kick off a really productive discussion today. I want to say thank you to the CQR task force, Allison Plyer, Kara Blumfield, and a special shout out to Taylor Sable, who managed the website and a lot of the technology. We really super appreciate that. I just can't thank them enough for their help. Every time I see them, I thank them again. And I want to thank the people who've been watching and listening as we've conducted this meeting. We really feel affirmed by your interest, and thank you so much for spending part of your Thursday with us. So with that, I'm ready to close out the meeting. It's a little early, but that's okay. Nobody ever minds a meeting that ends early. Again, my sincerest thanks, and we'll see you in March.